evening, and welcome back to the second season of First Aid Chats by Dr. G. I'm Dr. Dana Grandison, a physician in Barbados, and your hostess for this evening. First Aid Chats by Dr. G is a live podcast that provides listeners with a unique opportunity to not only hear complicated medical conditions explained, but also clarify any misunderstanding you may have about that condition. After all, a medically aware and educated patient is an empowered patient. And this evening, our episode is entitled Pharmacovigilance, the World of Drug Safety. And our guest is Dr. Maryam Hinds. Dr. Maryam Hinds is a pharmacist who has a PhD in pharmacology. She graduated from King's College University of London, and upon returning to Barbados, she worked both in the private and public sector, where she held the post of the chief pharmacist of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital before moving on to the directorship of the Barbados Drug Service since 1996. She has a special interest in pharmacovigilance, and she joins us this evening to share a bit about her knowledge on this very same topic. Good evening and welcome. Good evening, Miriam. As we wait for Dr. Hinds just to call in, um, then we'll have her answering some of the questions that we have for her. Dr. Hinds, you can go ahead and call in. I can see you actually in the room.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
Hello, good evening, and thanks for joining us, Dr. Hinds.
The honor and the privilege is mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. So, Dr. Hinds, before we get into pharmacovigilance this evening, I think it is important to really start the conversation about telling us a bit about the drug discovery pipeline, all of the phases that drugs and medications have to go through before they even get to market, and then we can actually shed some light on pharmacovigilance.
Okay. First, let me say that usually when a pharmaceutical company thinks of developing a drug for a particular condition, they have different parameters and things that they have to check.
Right.
And then they start with experiments in animals when they have developed the chemical that they want to use as a drug. They start with experiment with animals, and that's called preclinical before they start. And then when they're getting the kind of results that they expect or they want, they then start using the drug or testing the drug in healthy humans.
Right.
Healthy humans, not patients. And usually they wouldn't use too many people, maybe just up to 50 persons, between 20 and 50 healthy volunteers. That is the first phase. And then in the second phase, when they realize at that stage that they're still happy with the result they are getting, they will then move to the next phase. At every phase, when they're not happy or they're seeing that the risk is too high compared to the benefit, it stops there.
Right.
So whenever they move to the next phase, it means that the benefit outweigh the risk.
Mm-hmm.
So after testing it in healthy volunteers, they would then move to phase 2, where they will use a few patients, very few patients with the condition they want to test, and usually between 150 to 350 patients will be registered for phase 2 trials. And if after this phase they're still seeing good results, the benefit is by far higher than the risk. Let's just bear in mind that for anything, most drugs, if not all, would have the risk and the benefit. A lot of the time, the benefit by far outweigh the risk. That's why it is a drug that is approved. And after the few patients, they then move to phase 3. Phase 3 is almost the final stages that they are happy, it's almost conclusive. So they are now going to use more patients. They will use anything between 250 to to 2,000 patients. In very rare occasions, they may use up to 3,000 patients. And from there, it is more or less establishing that the drug is good, the benefits outweigh the risk, and it can be used in the market. And all through these periods, they are documenting and writing down, you know, uh, the expected like side effects that will come with it from the
Right.
pharmacology of the drug and so on. So they are documenting all of those so that by the time they're in phase 3, they're able to tell you what the drug is, what the benefit is, what the side effects are. And then after that phase, all that phase up to where we are now is called the pre-marketing. All those are trials. After phase 3 trial now, the drug is now approved to be used in the market. And now we now continue with the post-marketing surveillance. And pharmacovigilance is more or less the science that is going to be dealing with the drug from the beginning right through to the end, monitoring the safety of the drug and all the relevant information for the drug, the side effects, more or less confirming them, and noticing if maybe when there's a bigger group, now we're seeing more results and so more patients or any adjustments they need to make to the reported side effects and other reactions that they would have documented before. So basically, this is the whole gamut of how drugs are put into or introduced into the market. It goes through animal, healthy patients, few patients, more patients, and then it goes on the market. And then we start post-marketing surveillance. And pharmacovigilance is one of those sciences that is monitoring the drug after the drug is on the market.
Okay, great. So you spoke about pharmacovigilance actually being that science associated with monitoring that pharmacology. Walk us through the different aspects of pharmacovigilance.
Okay. In pharmacovigilance, you are expected, because sometimes you would hear, even physicians, not just patients, you would hear patients or physicians say, oh, this drug caused this, that. And the question always is, did you report it?
Right,
So it is important in pharmacovigilance that when there is any, in fact, it doesn't have to be something that you are absolutely certain. You just need to be suspicious. There's no good report and bad report when it
right,
comes to pharmacovigilance. Because something that you least suspect is significant, could be significant. And then something that you may be panicking and worrying about could be an expected outcome because of the pharmacology of the drug and how it's supposed to work. So you're supposed to report any effect that you feel, especially where it is not something that you are comfortable about. And
right.
let me digress to say, I know I'm talking about only negative things to do with the drugs. Sometimes there are some benefits that can be reported. For
Absolutely.
example, you know about sildenafil, Viagra. It
Yes.
was meant to be developed for erectile dysfunction. But in the monitoring of the drug afterwards, before it was to be used in the heart condition it was intended to, that adverse reaction, that reaction, let me put it that way, of um, sorting out erectile dysfunction was discovered. And the drug came to be known more for erectile dysfunction than the other heart conditions that, that it is supposed to be used for. And
Absolutely.
somewhere down the line, its benefit also in certain types of hypertension was discovered as well. So the importance of monitoring is very key in providing more information, science based, from both the patient and the clinicians that are monitoring the patient to give us more information about the drug. And using those effects and those reports, we're always weighing to see if there's any linkages between that report, if it is linked to the medication, if perhaps maybe there's no direct linkage, but the medication could induce it. And we start documenting, and then we know we have information that can help us to say, for example, okay, from our observations and from our studies, we have found that persons with certain comorbidities or certain of this particular race or persons with, this medication may not be useful in them, and maybe this other drug, or they will have more tendency to have this effect, to have this adverse reaction, or it will affect them in this way, or the kind of caution that will be needed, and so on and so forth. So, just to say, pharmacovigilance is very, very important in improving the science of a drug that is already out there. And that is why sometimes you would see that some drugs will be recalled, because after it is on the market, you'll find that they have some other significant adverse reactions that cause the risk to outweigh the benefit. So the drug will then be taken off. And also, pharmacovigilance help in terms of detecting the quality of the product, because sometimes it's not just the adverse reaction, it is maybe the quality of the product, maybe it is not effective, maybe it is defective, even from an instrument, like for example, a giving set for giving intravenous infusions and so on. So pharmacovigilance is going to help detect those kind of faults as well. And
Right.
it can also help in detecting medication errors, um, either due to maybe labels that are too similar or whatever. So with the pharmacovigilance, you're going to be able to detect those things that can be prevented. So it is the absolute monitoring of the safety aspect of medicines and related products.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it is very important, as you correctly said, to report if you notice that you have any effects that you know are not within your baseline or your normal. Because certainly you can also pick up things like drug to drug interactions. But I want to now go on to you have been using some terms that quite often we hear in the public forum that can bring a bit of confusion. You said side effects earlier, and then you said also adverse effects. Lend some clarity on those two terms for us.
Okay, well, I'm very happy that you mentioned that, because, as you would expect, when we mentioned, like I would have mentioned during the developmental stages of the drug and the
Mm.
various phases in the clinical studies before the drug is established, we would develop something called side effects. And the side effect of a drug, you know that this is an unintended effect that is occurring in a normal dose, and it is normal, it is expected, it is related to the pharmacological property of that drug. So the side effect of a drug usually can be established, and where it wasn't established prior to post-marketing surveillance, sometimes during post-marketing surveillance, you will see other side effects being added, because, as you would appreciate, in the different phases of the trial, not enough data would have been collated to give us the total information that we need. So sometimes as we go along, we will find a lot of additional information. And that's why sometimes you would hear about black box label, which means an additional information that is needed to be added to what was there before. And then there's an adverse reaction, which is a response to a medicine that is not very pleasant and is not intended. And usually that would occur at normal doses as well. So there's an adverse reaction that can happen, apart from the side effect that I told you is the normal expected pharmacologically linked uh, reaction, that, an effect that is can be caused by the medication. And then we have another term that we call an adverse event. So with pharmacovigilance, we are monitoring those adverse reactions because we're trying to see, it is as a result of taking medicine, is this adverse reaction linked to this medicine? Could this medicine be causing it or interacting with another medicine or even food to cause this reaction that we are seeing. So that is the difference between side effect and adverse reaction. And then on top of that, there's an adverse event. With an adverse event, this is a new clinical experience that we are now seeing. Um, Perhaps it was seen after medicine was taken. It might very well be that it has nothing to do with the medicine. But in most cases, the adverse events are noticed after uh, a patient starts a medication, and it is not necessarily a response to the medicine. And usually it is recorded by scientists, the science in pharmacovigilance, without any judgment on the cause. We
Right.
don't judge whether it is the medicine that has caused this event, but then you do the science, you record it, you keep monitoring, and then when, of course, there's sufficient science that leads to a signal, then you know, okay, this could be attributable to this particular medicine. So I hope I have clarified the difference between an adverse reaction and a side effect. And I would also want to say that sometimes when you see something that you see it as an adverse event or a side effect, it is something that we expect. For example, in vaccines, when you're given a vaccine, we expect your body to react,
Right.
to do something because something foreign has been introduced to it.
Right.
So in stages like that, yes, it is something that is desired to see that kind of reaction. And if I remember very well, when I was a child, I'm not sure if it was my BCG vaccination for tuberculosis, where if they give you the injection and you don't get a wound with a pus and whatever, they would say it is not good enough. You go back and get it again. So this is just an example of certain expectations when certain medicines are given, which to us, it may be seen as a side effect, but we are happy that it is happening because it tells us that the body is treating the medicine or the vaccine the way it is supposed to.
Okay, so we have a question already on the message board. Good evening. What if someone has multiple food or medication allergies? Should they take the COVID vaccine? Now, we were doing general pharmacovigilance, but I can see that our listeners are very, very interested in hearing already about the COVID vaccine. So let's answer this question.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So the question is, what if someone has multiple food or medication allergies? Should they take the COVID vaccine?
Um, I will answer into it depends on the vaccine. For example, in countries where there are options, it is known that the mRNA vaccines are more um, cause more serious effects in people who suffer allergies. So for in
Right,
those kind of countries where you would have both medication, different types of vaccines available, it might very well determine your predisposition could determine which vaccine should be given to you. So
right,
for for persons that for example have adverse reactions and they're allergic to so many things and so on, it will be useful, and that is why we always have the patients after the vaccination, say with the COVID-19, to wait for a little period so that we make sure there's no anaphylactic reaction or there's nothing. And usually we'll be asked questions anyway, especially when it is
right,
new, like the COVID vaccine that we have now. You'll be asked questions, and if we that you do have allergic reactions, you'll be monitored because it's best that you are in a clinical setting in the event that, further medical attention needs to be applied to you or not. But with the AstraZeneca vaccine, generally, a lot of persons with allergies can use them. Just they need to inform. Some persons will have their EpiPen ready with them. But once the healthcare professionals are aware that this patient has severe allergies, and therefore there is some kind of concern with administering the vaccine, they will be monitored to make sure that they are okay. But yes, uh, allergic reactions are real and they're things that can happen. And there are determinations where the benefit and the risk would outweigh the determination. In most cases, especially with COVID-19, the benefit of administering the vaccine will outweigh the risk, especially where the that vaccine is to induce allergic reactions, as some of the vaccines have proven to be.
And I'm glad that you brought up a term on the
Hello?
table, anaphylaxis, because are you hearing me, Miriam?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good, excellent. Because I just thought that we had a bit of break in communication. I'm glad you brought up the term anaphylaxis, because certainly when we look at not just the COVID vaccine, but any vaccine, we look at the ingredients that are in that vaccine. And if there are any of those ingredients that you are allergic to, then certainly we would say we don't recommend that you take the vaccine. And this has to do with vaccines across the board. But if a person has documented anaphylaxis, then as you correctly stated, it is really for that person to, one, walk with their EpiPen. You should always have your EpiPen on you if you've had a history of anaphylaxis. And then secondly, to disclose the fact that you have actually had an allergic reaction, a severe allergic reaction to a particular food or medication. And I'm happy that you brought up the fact that because you may be allergic to a food or medication does not necessarily mean that you will even have a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine. But in the event that there are any allergic reactions that do occur, because you have now notified the nurses and the doctors that are there to provide you with the vaccine, they will monitor you for, instead of 15 minutes, they will now monitor you for 30 minutes, which is actually quite important because most reactions tend to occur within that window. So we tend to see them then. But I know that there's a lot of concern within the community, certainly because it is something new. And so we want to really go back now to talking about certainly pharmacovigilance in terms of the process of the actual collection, that detection, the assessment as you spoke about it, and then the continuous monitoring, because it's important to collect that data. So tell us about that, Miriam.
Okay, so I will use the example of what is done at the Barbados Drug Service.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, we have a platform where persons can report adverse drug reactions. And we are part of the World Health Organization's drug safety monitoring. Um, I think it's now available in about 168 countries. And Barbados, since 2008, we've been part of that. So when we collect the data, usually we will look at the reports and we would try to follow up as much as we can. Usually, of course, initially before COVID-19, most of the reports were from physicians. So we would be able to have contact with the physician and how they're managing the patient with the adverse reaction and so on and so forth. In some instances, just withdrawing the medication where it is applicable or giving something different if it is something that there's another alternative to it, or if, in fact, even brands. In some instances, they can be resolved easily. But where there is a severe reaction that you don't want to take any chances in that, you would look to see if that medication, in fact, was the one that caused that kind of reaction. And you're monitoring, you're documenting, you're sharing with others, and it provides you with enough information that the person who would have suffered the severe adverse reaction could benefit by what remedy is to be put in place to make sure that the person is okay. And with the reports that we collect, we share the data so that at a global level, we're able to add adverse reactions to watch out for. Um, Before in Barbados, for example, we didn't know that carbamazepine or Tegretol was a drug that will cause Stevenson-Johnson syndrome. We thought it happened more in a particular ethnic group, the Chinese mainly. But maybe because of the potpourri of, what we in the Caribbean are, mixture of from everywhere, we started to notice that we were having those kind of reactions more than we are expected to or more than we would do. So informations like this would help us in terms of even counseling patients to say, well, look out for this or be careful with this, or if you see any rash or if you suffer, any respiratory distress or any gastrointestinal or even a cardiovascular effect, you feel your heart beating fast, or even sometimes it's on the skin. You can see generalized hives and severe itching, swelling of lips, swelling of the face, of the throat. Of course, the first thing that you would do is immediately to call an emergency line. And it's always good to, if you know somebody else, to let them know as well, so that while you are trying to seek medical attention, somebody is aware of your condition and helping you as well. This is useful just in the event that the adverse reaction exacerbates and becomes worse, that you may not be able to do the things that you would have set out to do in terms of trying to get medical attention. So the kind of reports that we collect and that we analyze would help us in terms of empowering and disseminating information to both healthcare providers and also to the general public so that they are aware. I'm not sure if that has kind of explain some of the things that we do behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that was very beneficial because you actually brought up another key point of some of the benefits of actually having a pharmacovigilance program, and that is we may know that there are some persons certainly that may present. We expect to have certain reactions with any medication or a medication that comes onto the market, as you said, which would be considered like your side effects. However, within a particular population or a particular racial background of persons, you may actually notice a difference in the presentation of certain symptoms. And it is with this essential avenue for persons to report that you can now collect the data and you can see the actual presentation of symptoms within your population and how your population is actually being affected, whether it is positively or negatively by the actual medication.
That is correct.
In addition, Dr. Hinds, I wanted to also go on to ask you about what is the process for the patient who has had a reaction. Walk us through step by step that process in terms of how do they report.
Um, okay. There are different avenues of reporting, whatever suits the patient best. Um, the first line, of course, is the easiest means of getting through to um, a medical person, be it your own GP or the accident emergency or the aftercare at the Winston Scott Polyclinic, but just try to seek for help. Call and inform. In our setting right now, we didn't used to do this before, but with the advent of COVID-19, we have stepped up in terms of pharmacovigilance, where we have an advisory group that will be looking at the adverse reactions, and we're able to sift out those that we consider significant or that is not like the normal, usual slight swelling, slight temperature that will go away in a day or 2 days or whatever, for us then to try to go deeper into it. So we have investigators that would go out in the field and try to find out what's happening, and try to find out, how the patient is doing, and all that, with two things in mind. Number one, to make sure the patient is okay and see what help the patient can get. Number two, to try to see if there's any linkage, looking at the patient's history and previous experiences, if there is any linkage to the medication, if the medication is thought to be the cause, or if it would have more or less, like we've had, for example, instances where we've noticed that patients may get myocarditis, or even a flare up of a herpes zoster infection, or things like that. So
And this
we're monitoring
and this is with drugs, period, not specifically to COVID vaccine, correct?
with drugs,
Right.
period, but including all the five, sorry, not five, all the approved ones that we know that we're monitoring. Let me say that it happens in very, very, very few
Right.
patients. If you were to go to a dermatologist, for example, and a laser beam is going to be used maybe to remove hair, they would usually advise you to take an antiviral medication, because if you suffer from what we would call cold sore
Right.
or herpes simplex, it may tend to flare up. So sometimes it is known ahead of time that this particular procedure or medication can flare it up, so that, if you have a tendency to have those kind of flare ups, then you'll be advised, and um, you would be counseled accordingly to take the necessary precaution.
Good. And is there any difference in terms of the reporting for a doctor?
Uh, yes, the difference is basically in terms of the terminologies.
Hmm.
For example, with a doctor, we may ask what the diagnosis was, how the patient was treated, what the doctor did, if the condition resolved after the doctor did whatever, if the doctor re-challenged. Of course, there's some severe adverse reactions that you would not want to re-challenge, or some that you cannot even re-challenge, because either
Right.
maybe it could lead to death, or the reaction is so severe that you don't want to re-challenge those things. So
Right.
at least those ones that can be challenged, just to establish that it is that. So the doctor now would be able to deal with a form that it is more technical. And
Right.
then for the reporting patients now, their forms will be much more simplified, in the sense that it will be in terminology, layman's terms, that um, would be easier to understand, and that the patient would be able to respond to. And where, as much as possible, we encourage patients to report, because sometimes patients are able to report things that the doctor may not be able to report, unless the doctor goes into detail to ask the patient questions, and go deeper into the particular report. So yes, the doctor's forms or reporting is a lot more technical compared to the patients, but both reports are very important, and the patient's reports are, I wouldn't say even more important, but they are just as important, in the sense that it will give more detail to how the patient felt, in their own lay term. And then from a scientific point of view, now you can be able to decipher exactly where that kind of reaction or that kind of explanation, what it is pointing to.
Right. Now, you spoke about the fact that pharmacovigilance is generally used for monitoring of any drug that is brought onto the market. In terms of
Yes.
generic versus branded drugs, is there a separate or different way of monitoring this medication? And how is it that a decision is then made for persons to use or for generic drugs to come into a market or branded drugs to come into a market, because quite often sometimes persons would be quite concerned, oh, the generics are not so good, or I don't want to use X particular drug because it's not this particular brand name. um, is that something that is monitored to ensure that the efficacy of the medication is as it should be, and that the actual contents of the medication certainly is as it should?
Yes, I'm glad that you asked this question. Let me say that usually when you're using a generic drug, you are looking for quality generic drugs that they are supposed to be just as effective and good as the brand. And I'm happy to tell you that there are some preparations where we have found that patients actually prefer to have the generic than to have the brand because of the other excipients or diluents or binders or whatever. Different companies would use different products. So sometimes it might very well be that the patient is reacting to something in the branded product that is not in the generic one, and vice versa. So we do have excipients that could cause different reactions, even though the drug is essentially the same active pharmaceutical ingredient. But the additives that is there to make the drug what it is may vary. Um, Granted, in many cases, it is more the generic one that patients may have reactions to. And that is simply because with the brand, and usually some of these reactions, it happens initially, and then afterwards, the body gets used to it. So
Right.
it might very well be that with the branded products, the body has already become acclimatized to it, is adjusted to it, to whatever ingredients are in it, that when a generic one comes, if there's something new or something different, what is in the branded product, the patient may react differently. But having said that, like I said, we've had instances where patients would prefer to take a generic product because they suffer less adverse reactions. And sometimes on the formulary, we do take different generic products, bearing that in mind,
Right.
because some patients are allergic to this particular brand, but not to this particular brand. So we try to have a variety of brands on the market so that the physician working with his patient, they would know which ones the patient can tolerate and which ones the patients cannot tolerate. And I'm happy to say that through pharmacovigilance, we have been able to sometimes approach pharmaceutical companies uh, to say to them, well, we are finding much benefit from your product, and we want to we want for you to look at the price to see if you can do something with it for us so that we can replace what's on our market with your product,
Right.
especially where the product is a lot more expensive, but it is proven to be more tolerated, or the safety profile of it is much higher and better than a particular generic. We would we would have been known to approach the manufacturer of the product that is best tolerated to say to them, can you come down on your price? And we would award you on the a contract, and we will put you in the formulary. So again, pointing to the importance of
Right.
reporting so that we know that that kind of information is useful for us in knowing. There are some physicians, of course, who do not, and not just physicians, pharmacists and patients who do not like to use generic. They prefer to use the brand. And I can tell you that there's some brand companies that they decide to do a generic product to their product when the patent expires,
Right.
so that they can have those avenues of marketing their products.
Right.
And sometimes when patients don't know, they think, oh, I'm allergic to this one, but not to that one. And when you look at it, it's the same exact product, just that the branded company is now having it as a generic product with a different name.
All right.
So patients, so sometimes it could be mind over matter as well. When patients think, oh, this is a generic product, and they just believe, oh, generics are no good, because in the pharmaceutical industry, you do have the branded companies, when their patents are off, they've enjoyed that privilege of monopoly to make up for their research and development. That when they realize they're going to get a lot of competition, they themselves have a generic product as well.
Right. Now you spoke about the importance of that reporting, certainly so that we can know how that drug is affecting our population. But like with some things, as you correctly said, sometimes we start to notice for that particular population, the benefits do not outweigh the risk. Is there a mechanism to stop, to halt, to reassess any drug on the market that may be for your specific market before continuing that market? Because I know that there are a lot of persons who are concerned that, once that drug is out there, there's no way of reclaiming or taking that drug off the market for the safety of the population. Just tell us about that a bit, because I know it is something that can happen if certainly we monitor and we notice that something adverse is happening to our population.
Yes, and Adana, I would like to say that the pharmaceutical industry is a self-regulatory one,
Absolutely.
especially like in countries where there's a lot of suing. So sometimes before we even know that there's a problem with the product, they bring it to our attention. They will let us know that, oh, during manufacturing there was contamination, or there could be levels of products that, at low level, they're very, what do you call it? They're safe, but when the level of it is high, and
Subtherapeutic levels of a contaminant.
that's correct. So sometimes this is not just in the drug, sometimes even in
Right.
water, the level of contaminant are there, and there's a level that is safe, and there's a level that is not safe. So the pharmaceutical industry would usually initiate a recall. However, we also do initiate recalls. Just recently, about sometimes last week, there's a certain brand of paracetamol that we tested, and we found that the quantity was not sufficient, as the 500 milligram and the various variations it should have.
Right.
And we took steps to withdraw that product from the market. The company would have written to pharmacies to say, this particular batch have been tested, and this is what was found, and this is what they're doing. So the pharmaceutical industry itself is always working with regulators. Either they initiate the recall, or when the regulators feel that there's an issue and they want that product recalled, they will just contact the company, and it is done.
Right.
So again, pointing to the importance of reporting, so that we can, and we don't, um, we are very much aware that uh, there's a competition out there. So we don't just depend on persons to come and say, oh, that product is not good, this one is good. Because you could be speaking for some person who is working for a company that you favor, or a company that you want to favor. So we don't just take just the report lightly.
Right.
We delve into the science of it, and we go and look for sources of information that is unbiased, that we can look into it, not just what the leaflet from what the manufacturer is saying. Most of the time, of course, they have to stand by what is written in their leaflets. So they would make sure it is as accurate as possible, when they're presenting it. But we go beyond that. We don't just look at what the manufacturer is telling us. We look at the science, and there's so many evidence based science references that we use to assist us in our assessment. So we're always assessing, always continuously. And whenever we feel that the risk even compares to the benefit, we're not even going to say outweighs it. When we see that the risk is too high, we would recall that product from the market.
And I'm glad that you actually brought the example of what occurred last week, because the medication itself, there was nothing faulty with the medication. It wasn't the incorrect drug. You know, it didn't have any contaminants, but it just wasn't the correct dose as advertised. And some person may say, well, that's not too serious, but it is serious because you expect to get a desired outcome from the correct dosage of drug. And I'm happy to hear that we actually have a monitoring system in place that is that strict to ensure that things are being kept to a particular standard for the population. Now, I wanted to go on. Is there any particular time frame that a person has to report their symptoms in? Is there a cutoff period?
Well, of course, for very severe reactions, we want you to report it immediately. But sometimes patients with procrastinate, and sometimes by the time they are reporting, maybe there could have been some intervention that could have been done to, help out with the reaction. But if it's not reported on time, then it is too late. And again, like I said, if we are to get information that would help us to plan for interventions that, like actions that need to be regulatory actions that need to be taken immediately, reporting it late would not have helped us, because maybe we could have been able to prevent a similar reaction happening to others, or we would have been able to remove what we would have been able to remove from the market on time. So it is important to report as soon as one can. In some countries, there is a law that when there's adverse reaction, it must be reported. But I think that but we do have that kind of relationship with the pharmaceutical companies, where we give them a time frame for severe adverse reactions, especially one that will cause death or hospitalization, severe reactions. We expect them to report to us within 24 to 48
Right.
hours. And then for other reactions, it doesn't matter, maybe 7 days or a month, but we always ask them to report and let us know. And also, we ask them to report not just what is happening in our market. So, for example, if they are marketing paracetamol on our market, and they marketing it in Trinidad and in the United States and in the UK, and there's any adverse reaction in the UK or in the United States, we expect them to let us know, not just when it happens. Of course, first and famous, when it happens in our market,
Right.
but also when products that are on our market, when there's any adverse reaction to it elsewhere, for them to let us know. And on top of that, we also ask them to give us product safety updates reports, so that, this is as part of the continuation of the monitoring of the safety of the products. So they are expected to some companies 3 months, some companies 6 months, but to give us product safety updates with respect to and in fact, now they are starting to do product benefit uh, effectiveness and risk ratio. So they're supposed to be doing all of that and be letting us know, so that at any point, uh, at any time T, that we realize that there is increase in the risk, then of course, depending on of what kind of medication it is, a decision is made either to take it off or to add a label to it to say it causes this.
Right. And you spoke about the fact that there is international notification, an international database. Tell us a bit about that database. That would be the Vigibase, I think it is.
Yes, it's VG based. So the World Health Organization, they have a software that they share with drug regulatory authorities. You pay for it, of course. So Barbados, we subscribe to it, and annual basis we pay for a license fee so that we can be able to use it. And with that software, you can have assistance throughout the year.
Right.
So with that software, all countries that are in the program are entering all the adverse reports that have been reported to them. And when you are seeing some kind of signal as if, hmm, I'm seeing a lot of this type of reaction, you can actually go into that database and check and see if this adverse reaction is happening in any country of your choice. Or if you want to lump a set of countries together, for example, if you want to lump all COARCOM countries together and see what is happening within the region, you'll be able to get that report.
Right.
If you want to run a global report, you'll be able to run that report. And as a matter of fact, for persons who have interest in research, uh, this is a great area to go into, this whole area of pharmacovigilance, because there's so much science in it that, it's relevant, it's ensuring the safety of products on the market, and is helping in terms of having a communication with healthcare providers and the patients. As you would appreciate, there's so many people who, for example, with this vaccine, because now with media, social media, the way it is now, somebody just need to formulate something in their head and just put it down and start passing it on.
Right.
And you would see, people get, intimidated, or they get frightened. And a lot of the time it's just fake
Right.
news, or persons who are against, vaccines, or against a particular. In fact, there's some persons who are against taking drugs,
Right.
period, because they believe that, the natural remedies are the best. Even the natural remedies, whereas yes, they have their own usefulness, but even then, they also have adverse reactions to
Yeah.
them. So sometimes persons say, "Oh, this is a plant. So when I take a plant, it has no adverse reactions." It is not so at all. So the more science we know about them, the more we would be able to know what the side effects are, what to avoid, which two drugs not to use together. Everybody knows about Morbi. Everybody knows about Morbi. I was being an anticoagulant and not to be taken with certain products, or when you're taking certain drugs, and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of information that we want to have, that it is wide, that it is open, that it is transparent, so that when we tell John public, we stand by this product from all our investigations, from all what we can see, and from the science of it, the benefit outweighs the risk, that they can be able to trust us
Yeah.
to say this is it, than something that they would have seen circulating on social media. And I must say that we tried to get some persons tried to bring those kind of reports to us, but they were not aware that we were going to be monitoring, and we would be checking. If you say there's this reaction, we can be able to trace right down to the patient, where they were vaccinated, for example, and so on and so forth. But persons who are against vaccine tried to interfere with it, but we were able to keep them at bay, because everything was well documented, and we were able to identify all the persons that we needed to identify. So um, again, this is somewhere where there is need for transparency and communication between us healthcare providers and John public with us. And as you would appreciate, if we tell them something different from what we have, it's just a matter of time they are going to find out that we're lying to them.
Absolutely.
And once that trust and transparency is lost, then we're going to have problems. So we want to at all times be sure that there is transparency, that we are understanding each other.
I, I, I
So
I wanted to wrap up by asking you this last question, or maybe it's a statement really, because you made the comment about Maubee, which is something that we tend to use here as a drink here in Barbados as well as in the wider Caribbean. But I'm happy that you brought it up, because quite often, not just Maubee, but wider speaking, uh, Caribbean folks, we tend to use lots of bush teas. And it is very important, as you stated, to be very transparent in all of the things that you are using, not just the medications that you would have been prescribed from your doctor, but if you're using any bush teas, any herbal supplements, any preparations, any poultices, to make sure to actually also provide that information. Because remember that pharmacovigilance really is not just looking at those adverse effects, but as you correctly stated, sometimes in monitoring a particular drug or how a drug interacts with another drug, we may find that there is an additional use or a benefit of that medication. So, given that we have 4 more minutes on our podcast, Dr. Hinds, is there anything in particular that you would like to share with the public as a take home point in terms of why reporting is important? And not just for necessarily the COVID vaccine, but certainly for any drugs that they may use or interact and have any adverse effects. And certainly tell us where they can actually report their adverse findings to.
Okay, thank you, Adana. Well, definitely, what I would like John Public to know is that there is a system in place that is monitoring the safety of the drugs that are on the market, and also we are monitoring um, um, other medical products as well, not just the drugs, for any defect. And there is I've forgotten the our link
I'm
now.
just gonna put
Drug
I'm just
services.
gonna put it on the actual message board so that you can see it.
Thank you so much. So there is a reporting system whereby persons can report directly, or they can report to their GP, their general practitioner, or their physician, and it will come to us. And the importance of being part and parcel of it is when patients are involved in their own care, they can take pride, in being part uh, of the team, because we're, as the Prime Minister and a lot of people always say, we're in this together. So it is not about us medical practitioners and patients, but everything is geared towards the safety, because even medical practitioners, they are sometimes the patients.
Correct.
So we want to make sure that the drugs on our market are safe. We want to make sure that we have a system where all adverse reactions experienced are being reported. And like I said earlier, you don't have to be certain. You just need to be suspicious. Just suspect it and leave the rest to us. We will then use the data, and we would be collating. Unfortunately, I must admit that we have not been very, very effective, except in very limited cases where we would have reached out to the patients personally, either to visit them or to call them and follow up certain things. We have not been very efficient in communicating back to persons about the reports or what we have done, but that is work in progress that we are looking to see that in the future we would be able to have newsletters that we can be sharing, so that both healthcare providers that would have submitted reports and John Public would be able to see the importance of the reports that they have submitted and what we have been able to do with it. So there is a mechanism. You can go online, and we're even going to be stepping it further in a few months' time, where you can actually be reporting directly into the WHO database. Of course, it wouldn't be posted, but we would be able to see it to reduce our job as well. Because instead of us getting it from you and then key it in, you would be able to key it in directly, and we're going to be able to just post it into the after of course we've just done all the due diligence to check to make sure the information that we need in making sense out of it is all there for us to be able to post it. So I just want to say thank you very much for having me in the program, and I really hope that we can be each other's keeper. When you see an adverse effect for adverse event, adverse reaction in a patient, report it. And the patient, you can report to yourself or report for your child, for your family members, your friends, that we would be able to all work collectively together for the sake of the safety of medicines in Barbados. And I thank you for this opportunity to share with you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hinds. I want to say thank you so much again for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. I know this is a very hectic time for you, I also want to say thanks a lot to our listeners who would have participated on the message board. I saw we had a question this evening. And once again, I want to encourage you to follow us on both Podbean and Anchor and join us next week for First Aid Chats by Dr. G, closing the gap. Good evening and thank you, everybody.